And joining us now to talk about the U.S.'s bombing of nuclear facilities in Iran is Joanne Leslie McGill, Chief of Staff, U.S.-Israel Education Association. Also joining us is Avi Melamed, former Israeli intelligence official and senior official on Arab affairs. So, Joanne, let me start with you. So you heard there's two sides to this. One side is absolutely celebrating the actions that U.S. have committed last night, and the other side saying this was essentially a very bad move. I'm standing somewhere in the middle, so let's have a logical, rational conversation about this. The bottom line is Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, right? President Trump has said this on many occasions. Was there any other choice? I mean, President Trump had to negotiate with Iran to no avail with the regime, right?
Yes, you're exactly right. I think we have to have a logical conversation, as you said. The terms from the president have not changed. He's been unequivocal for almost a decade now that Iran cannot possess a nuclear weapon. And so as he pursued the diplomatic route, it became obvious that the Iranians were not willing to negotiate in good faith or give up their nuclear weapons, which we knew they wouldn't. But at least the president went that route first, and it really left no other option than the strikes that we saw yesterday. I think it was the cleanest way. I think it was the fastest way. It did not endanger any U.S. citizens in the process. I think it was absolutely the right move on behalf of the president.
Avi, what do you think? Was this the right decision on the U.S.'s part?
I think we have to do also to look at the circumstances of this whole move, starting with the Israeli attack on Iran. We looked at a very interesting, unique opportunity window where the Mullah regime that has inflicted upon this region an enormous catastrophe, death, and destruction for the last 4 decades, now find itself in one of its most vulnerable situations. Its proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip, the Iraqi Shiite militias, the downfall of Assad regime in Syria, all those things together with the combination of increasing challenges within Iran, economically, environmentally, socially, basically exposed the Mullah regime, I would say, in an unprecedented way since the 1980s. So from a geostrategic, operational intelligence perspective, that was definitely the right time to launch that attack. And as Joanne mentioned earlier before, and I agree with her, we have to remind ourselves, there has been an endless rounds of discussions with that regime that excel in basically evaporating any kind of like talks. We have a very good experience, or to say bad experience, in that context for the many years that before proceeded the JCPOA in 2015, and following that, every single time there were reports that the Mullah regime actually is violating its commitments to the international community. So I think that was definitely the right decision in the right time.
Joanne, per your analysis, has Iran's nuclear capabilities been essentially reduced to zero after this attack?
Well, I know that we heard from the Pentagon's briefing this morning that it will take some time to be able to fully assess the situation. But I believe that the president and the United States military would not have gone in and conducted such strikes unless they were absolutely certain that they were eliminating Iran's nuclear capabilities. I do not think they would have gone in with any chance of it being left intact. And one thing I want to say, we were just talking about Iran's proxies in the region. I know that a lot of the dispute around whether or not this was the right move is fear of fallout or escalation. But I think that we also have to point to what Israel has been able to accomplish over the past 18 months, which is completely dismantling and decimating Iran's proxies in the region, which eliminates a lot of the threat of escalation and fallout that we could have seen in the region.
Okay, Avi, a similar question. Did the U.S. incapacitate Iran's nuclear capabilities?
I think the right definition will be that I don't think that these capacities has been totally annihilated, and I don't think it's realistically. I think that we should look at it more from the perspective of it has been significantly set back to the past. Basically, they have lost significant amount of the infrastructure that they have been building thus far. I think that the major mission onwards is trying to make sure that they will not try, and they will probably try to rehabilitate that infrastructure that has been significantly damaged. So I think that we have to be more accurate in the definition. I don't think that it has been totally destroyed, but I think it clearly has been significantly damaged, definitely pushed back significantly, substantially. But I think that we have to look forward and to make sure that in any kind of constellation, there is going to be a very significant mechanism that will make sure that this regime, assuming it's going to stay in power, will not be able to resume its efforts to obtain nuclear military capacities.
Avi, should the U.S. Pursue a regime change in Iran?
The issue of the regime change in Iran, in the end of the day, goes back to the Iranian people. And I think that one of the things that we should maybe expect is that one of the outcomes of this whole dramatic tectonic plate movement will be a chain of shocks within the establishment, the Iranian establishment itself. I think that we could expect an increasing and intensifying power struggle within this regime. That will be something that may coincide with already existing upheaval and feelings of animosity and resentments. Most of the Iranians, it's not a secret, loathe this brutal regime that has been brutally oppressing them for decades. And so it may be that down the road we may witness some sort of like what I call domino effect. Something similar to a certain extent to the domino effect that we have been witnessing following October 7, that one of the things that it has resulted in was the downfall, which was totally unexpected, the downfall of Assad regime in Syria in a very short period of time. This is something that may take place in the context of Iran. I don't think that per se that should be a declared objective of the moves on the ground. If that is going to be, in the end of the day, the outcome of this domino effect, I think that the world will be a better place without this brutal, oppressive regime.
Okay, Joan Leslie, let me get your reaction to what Avi said, and as well, could you comment on whether you think the president was within his authority to do this?
I do think the president was well within his constitutional authority as the commander-in-chief to carry out this limited and precise strike. I do want to go back to the question of regime change. So I've been saying all week, I think there were two things that were inevitable from the moment that Israel began these strikes last week. One of those was that U.S. involvement was imminent. I believed that it was coming in the next few days, and it did. And the second part of that is I believe regime change is also inevitable. I do not think that the United States or the Israeli governments have been pursuing regime change, nor do I think they should. But as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, they're merely creating the context for regime change to take place. Now, that ultimately rests with the Iranian people and with their will and desire. But I do think that now is the first opportune moment in the Iranian history, or at least in the past 40 years, for that to happen. And regime change is a spectrum. You know, there's multiple scenarios that could play out of what that looks like. But I do think we're at that inflection point moment.
And as well, Joan Leslie, is it possible to get rid of Iran's nuclear program without a regime change? Because, you know, they can just continue building more facilities once a current one is destroyed.
I find it very difficult to believe that we could get rid of Iran's nuclear program while the Ayatollah is still in power. It's a part of their pride. It's a part of their regime. I've long said that the leader and the nuclear weapons are synonymous. It is the regime to have both. And so I don't see a situation where the Iranians will back down at this point and they're going to completely renege on their hard line, which is to have enrichment capabilities. So no, I don't think it's possible while the Ayatollah is still in power.
Okay, Avi, same question. Is it possible to completely get rid of Iran's nuclear program without a change in regime?
No, I totally agree with John on that point. I think that as long as the regime is in power, we should be acting under the assumption that this regime will always try to obtain this capacity. It has to do both with an ideological as well as operational interest of that regime. In the eyes of the regime, in the end of the day, that ability was supposed to provide the ultimate insurance policy for the survival and duration of this regime. So I think that as long as this regime is in power in Iran, our basic assumption will be always that this is regime that is radical. This is regime that is always looking for venues to expand and export instability across the region, as it has been doing, unfortunately, quite successfully for the last 4 decades. And that should be our basic assumption. This is a very radical and dangerous regime. Many times it has been proven very, very significantly. And one more thing that I want to add in that regard, some circles in the West are echoing the context of, or the slogan of resistance. This is a slogan that has been echoed by the regime to basically cover up its regional aggression. Those in the West who echoes and support that slogan should understand that they are not putting themselves on the right side of history. To the opposite, they are putting themselves on the wrong side of history, because under this slogan of resistance, the Iranian regime, the mullah regime, inflicted an enormous death and destruction upon Israelis and Palestinians and Syrians and Lebanese and Iraqis and Yemenites. We should be aware of that.
So, Joan Leslie, are American troops and bases now at risk of retaliation because of what happened last night with the strikes?
I do think that our American servicemen and women in the region are at the most risk for retaliation. I think that Iran cannot let this slide completely. They're going to have to walk a very fine line in their response. I think that they will issue some sort of retaliation, likely against U.S. bases in the region, but I also think that it will be minimal. I think that they know it is not in their interest to continue escalating. They've lost all means of leverage, all means of the upper hand. So there will be a response. We've already seen ballistic missiles coming into Israel today in response, but I do think that American bases will also be targeted, but it will be minimal.
And Avi, how do we avoid escalation of this into a war?
Well, there are many factors in play, sort of speaking. I do need to emphasize there are a couple of players that we should pay attention to that, roughly speaking, has been, so far on the sideline. These are Russia and China. These are two major allies of the Iranian regime. And I think that from their perspective, it's interesting to see that, relatively speaking, they have been mute. I think that they have been signaling more and more to the mullah regime that he must find a way to end this story of this military standoff. And actually, because not only the interest of the regime in the end of the day, if it wants to survive, but also I think that China and Russia are more and more disturbed with the possibility of the expansion and deterioration of the conflict. So I think it will be interesting also to follow closely the Chinese and the Russian position. It probably will be more beyond the scenes, but it is something that I think could play a very significant role in determining, in the end of the day, whether we are heading towards escalation or calming down of the situation. It's not the only thing, of course. There are other things involved. But I think that, roughly speaking, if we want to try to evaluate the trajectory ahead, I think this is one of the major issues that we should follow very closely to see how things are evolving.
Okay, Joan Leslie, we have just about 30 seconds. If you have any final thoughts.
I'd just like to say, I think what we saw last night was a stunning display in the U.S.-Israel relationship. Even President Trump giving thanks to the Israeli government and the Israeli army, the IDF, in his announcement to the nation. It just displays what we've known, which is that the U.S.-Israel relationship is ironclad. I think there are many people with their own interests who have tried to question that over the past few months, and we've seen that the U.S. has come to its allies' defense in this situation.
Okay, thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.